Scanners, the mind force. Their thoughts can kill. 10 seconds, excruciating pain. 15 seconds, arrested breathing. 20 seconds, brain fire. Enter the outer reaches of future shock, where the mind is a terrifying weapon of destruction. Scanners. A novel by Leon Whiteson, based on the original screenplay by David Cronenberg. Narrated by Amy Mullen. The auditorium in the headquarters building of Continental Security was in the severe modern style of any medium-sized corporation anywhere. But what the speaker on the platform was saying to his small, select audience of executives was quite extraordinary. I would like to scan each one of you in this room, one at a time. I must remind you that the experience is usually a painful one, sometimes resulting in nosebleeds, earaches, nausea, stomach cramps, and other symptoms of a similar nature. The speaker paused, nervously jerking his tie. His reclasped hands twitched on the polished mahogany surface of the desk that stood like a low protective wall between him and the upturned faces in the front rows. The executives listened with relaxed interest. They had the sharp eyes of men who had received many pitches in their time. So far, their expressions telegraphed, they were interested but not amazed. Behind the tense man on the platform, the elegant logo of CONSEC, 3 interlocking stylized arms, was dramatically backlit. The speaker peered out over the sleek heads of the executives, seeking moral support from a bunch of heavy-set security men sitting alertly several rows behind. Among them was a doctor in a white coat with a medical bag on his lap. He nodded back at the speaker reassuringly. I know you're all prepared for this, but I wanted to remind you just the same. We have a doctor standing by. No one will be allowed to leave the room until the demonstration is over. I'd like a volunteer to start us off. There was an awkward pause until a lean, intense man put up his hand. The speaker responded with relief, gesturing to the volunteer to join him on the platform. The volunteer did not offer his name, though his plastic security clearance card with its photo was pinned to his breast pocket. In his dark, 3-piece business suit he seemed unremarkable, but for a certain tension around the eyes and a small, odd cratered scar in the middle of his forehead, like the relic of a third eye. He sat in the spare chair beside the speaker and clasped his hands together on the polished desk. What do you want me to do? He asked in a flat voice. The speaker smiled faintly. I'd like you to think of something specific, he said. Something that won't breach the security of your organization. Must I shut my eyes? As you wish. Just relax and think of something specific. The volunteer chose to shut his eyes. He seemed tense but strangely unafraid. Perhaps he was skeptical of the whole business of scanning. Maybe he'd seen it all before and hadn't been much impressed. However it was, he appeared alertly relaxed, as the speaker also shut his eyes, clenched his palms together, and began to concentrate intently. The audience was more involved now, more on the edge of their seats. If there was anything to this scanning technique, this was show-me time. The white-coated doctor clutched his bag of nostrums nervously and stared through his horn rims at the antagonists on the platform. Yes, antagonists. The speaker and the volunteer had become locked in a mental duel that made them both sweat. The volunteer's left nostril began to bleed. A dribble of redness ran down his lip, leaking from his flaring nose. A raw lump rose on the left side of his face just above the cheekbone. The scooped scar on his forehead seemed to hollow out as if about to blow like a miniature volcano. The speaker was under strain, but at first it seemed he dominated. The other man was suffering more. His face was more tortured. Then subtly the balance of power tilted the other way. The volunteer's face took on a demonic cast, a grimace of evil. His eyes flicked open like a snake, focusing for the kill. The speaker's cheeks began to swell up like balloons. His clenched fists drummed on the tabletop in agony. As the other man's force became more and more intense, more and more concentrated, the speaker's tie popped from his swollen neck. He lunged back and forth in his chair, writhing in the trap of the dark man's power. But the lean man's face was merciless. He shuddered with the energy pulsing from his mind. His harsh profile was like an axe blade slicing into the speaker's skull. The audience watched in paralyzed astonishment. Even the security men were too dumbstruck to intervene. A strange sound filled the auditorium, a kind of whirring, whooping, high-pitched electronic squealing. It was inhuman. It was terrifying. The speaker clawed at his flesh, tearing at his own cheeks as the scan tone electrified his sinuses. It arced through his brain, blowing the circuits. He blurted in terror and anguish, "No!" The man's eyes popped wide in one last desperate appeal against his torment. He tried to rise from his chair. Too late. His entire skull exploded. His head burst like a dynamited watermelon. A geyser of hot, red blood gushed from the stump of his neck just above his collar and tie. It sprayed the Consec logo behind him and the front row he faced. For one frozen moment he was a gorgeous flower of gore, his body the stiffened stem. Then all hell broke loose. The vast underground shopping mall was an anonymous refuge from the confusion of the city streets above. In its warm blandness, its amiable crowds drifting between bright shop fronts, the cheerful smells of hamburger, pizza, and instant chicken, the comforting background hum of the electrical life support systems, without which it couldn't have existed, a lost soul could drift forever, free of time and season. Cameron Vale was just such a lost soul. At first sight he appeared to be just another chunk of human garbage churned out offhandedly by any busy city. A foul, stained old raincoat hung on his skinny scarecrow frame. A dirty brown wool hat was jammed down over his long, greasy locks. The backs of his raw hands were decorated with old scabs and scars. His oversized shoes looked like cast-offs from a Charlie Chaplin movie. No one took any notice of him as he wandered between the plastic tables of the eating area, scavenging leftovers from paper plates. Like a sick old crow, he pecked at bits of hot dog and scraps of French fries without much joy, washing down this feast with gulps of Coke and pop mixed up together in a stained styrofoam cup. He rested dazedly at a table eating his meal, unnoticed and unnoticing. No, It wasn't quite true that he was unnoticed. On the far side of the eating area hovered two men with upturned collars on their coats who were very interested in Vale. They resembled a pair of bald vultures hovering in the shadows, waiting for their prey to stumble. Vale was oblivious of them, as he was of everything. He seemed to exist only in his own private space, as if he were trying to be invisible to the alien, angry world around him. He fed off its scraps, yet he was terrified it might suddenly see he was there and crush him as casually as a bug. On a closer look, his face was surprisingly boyish. He could be 35, yet he seemed 10 years younger. And the features were sensitive. The soft brown eyes had tenderness hiding behind their terror. The sensuous mouth and dimpled chin gave hints of an intensely imaginative inner life. With a little charity, it would not have been difficult to cast him as a youngish hippie poet down on his luck. The two middle-aged matrons chattering over hot danishes at a nearby table felt no such charity. Insofar as they took account of Vale, he was junk. Catching his eye casually, the more sharp-faced woman of the pair grimaced. It was one of those momentary eye contacts you make 1,000 times a day in a city. The surface of your mind registers an impression and skitters on. Perhaps that night in bed you might have a weird dream sparked by that flash of recognition of another human being's essence. Most likely it would be totally lost in the jumble of mental chatter that makes up any waking urban life. On this occasion, the woman wanted nothing more, after having registered Vale as a bum, than to go on gossiping. But her eye was hooked. She could not unglue her gaze from the young man's. This mind lock was not deliberate on Vale's part. He did not even really know it was happening. Yet his neck stiffened instantly. His head began to jerk in a queer spasm. His heart throbbed hard in his chest, and his breathing deepened as if he were in a yoga trance. Across the way, the matron began to shiver. A chill ran up and down her spine in the warmth of the mall. She tore her gaze away from Vale's, but her agitation did not cease. Her skin felt burned and frozen by turns, as if she were being microwaved and iced alternately. Her friend gaped at her. "Dorothy, you okay, dear?" Dorothy twitched on her seat. Her heart seemed to be jumping out of her mouth. Her nerves were live wires. Her head jerked spasmically, dislodging her platinum wig. All at once she seemed to be like a doll roughly handled by some monster child. A few yards distant, Vale's head was rolling. His eyes were narrowed to slits. Energy flashed out between his fluttering lashes. The force pulsing from his mind locked into the circuits of the woman at the nearby table. His head was startled with a rapid series of images, like a television set gone mad. Each image was an explosion of power in his brain. It was both exhilarating and terrifying. He wanted to run, yet he was rooted. Most frightening of all, he really had no idea what was happening to him. Yet at that instant he felt intensely alive. He knew, by some instinct, that this was what he was made for. This was it. This was life. All the rest had been nothing more than waiting. It was more than a cheap thrill, a quick hit, an ego trip. He had the power. But for what? Vale had no idea. He was as much a victim of what was happening now as the poor woman across the way. And she was writhing. She was on the verge of a full-scale epileptic fit. Her head snapped back. Her mouth gaped in a silent scream that came out a strangled gurgle. She hurled herself backward onto the tiled floor and landed with a sickening thump. "Dory!" her companion screeched. Dorothy rolled around madly on the tiles, banging her head against chair legs. The hem of her sober tweed suit rode up, revealing a rather risque slip red as a lizard's mouth. Her long legs drummed on the floor. Her elegant pumps went flying. Her wig rolled off and hid itself in shame under a tray trolley. "Make way!" an authoritative voice snapped. A young man stepped out of the crowd, shoving people back from the writhing woman. He knelt beside Dorothy, grabbed her jaw firmly in one fist, and jammed a leather glove between her teeth. The matron bit down on it like a rabid dog. Spittle sprayed from her snarl. "She's an epileptic," the young man said tersely. "Got to keep her from hurting herself. Help me." But the onlookers were too afraid in their fascination. No one came forward. "I'm a medical student," the young man explained exasperatedly. "It's simply epilepsy, don't you see? Come on, hold her legs down. The spell will pass soon enough." A girl gave her boyfriend a shove. He staggered forward reluctantly and grasped the woman's ankles, averting his eyes from the nakedness of her stockinged, middle-aged thighs. "That's it," the medical student said thankfully. "Don't let her hurt herself. It'll soon pass." A short distance off, Vale seemed to hear this soothing, professional voice. His body tensed, stiff as a board. On the tiled floor, the matron's body imitated his. Then Vale collapsed. His figure crumpled. His victim's form copied this exactly. "You see?" the medical student crowed, happy that his diagnosis had proven so immediately accurate. "It's gonna be all right." He stroked Dorothy's dull, gray-streaked hair. Without her wig, she looked really old. Her eyelids fluttered pitifully. "All over," the young man soothed. "Passing now." For Vale, too, it was passing. He looked wrung out. Gripped in one fist was the remains of a hot dog. It was squashed to mush, the mustard yellowing his thumb. Vale stared at it helplessly. The homogenized frankfurter and roll struck to his palm like a tumor. Dazedly, Vale wiped his hand on his coat, smearing it mustard yellow. This new tone added a certain dash to his tatters. He blinked, as if waking from a dream. He began to rise, to test if his legs were still there. They were, though shaky. At that moment, the two men in raincoats made their move. Vale sensed them instantly. Their menace invaded his mind. With an animal instinct of preservation, he bolted for the stairs. One of the security men ran after him. The other plucked a short-snouted air rifle from under his coat. It was fitted with a compressed air dart of the kind used to tranquilize wild animals. He lifted it to his shoulder and took aim at the fleeing Vale. Vale leaped up the stairs in terror. He didn't know what the danger was, but his head was bursting with it. The first security man dashed up the adjoining stairs to head him off. Seeing the trap, Vale vaulted over the handrail and tried to make the parallel escalator. He missed, and only just managed to grab the moving rubber handhold. Legs flailing, he was carried upward. Below him was an abyss. A shopper riding the escalator hauled Vale aboard. As he was scrambling to safety, the second security man fired his dart. It zoomed through the air and jabbed into Vale's hand. The feathered guide hung like a tassel from the young man's palm. Vale stared down at the unwanted ornament. He couldn't make out what it was. All at once he began to feel very, very relaxed. His knees melted. He sank to the ribbed metal floor of the moving stairway and was delivered in a heap at the feet of the first security man. Vale's last vision was of a pair of very sturdy brown Oxfords as his cheek came to rest on the man's shoe. Revik rose and looked down at Cam from his full height. There's a whole new generation of scanners just a few months away from being born from the ephemeral I've distributed among all those innocent doctors. Our people, Cam. Our people! And what will you do with them? Cam asked, fearing the reply. Rule the world, Revik said simply. Cam burst out laughing. He roared, Rule the world? Ridiculous! Revik dropped to his haunches before Cam. He looked up at his younger brother's face with earnest, deadly serious eyes. He was so close, Cam could see right into the tiny crater on his forehead. It was like a miniature volcano about to erupt. It throbbed with pinkish blood under the skin. Haven't you always been despised by the world of normals? Haven't they always jeered at you, pointed you out as a freak, a weirdo, some kind of cockeyed ape? Didn't your own father betray you, use you, exploit you? Do you really think I'm mad to hate them all? Cam stared at his brother. He could see the pain in Revik's black pupils. It moved him to pity. It made him want to cry. I think, he began slowly, hunting for the right words, you should stop killing yourself. Revik blinked. Huh? Don't you see? Cam urged. You're letting your hatred burn you up from inside. Daryl, he leaned forward urgently. Can't we just be ordinary people at last, now that we've found one another? Ordinary people? Revik screeched. Are you mad? You mean after all they've put us through, you want to be just like them? Cameron, I've been counting on you. All these years. Are you going to betray me like everyone else? Tell me you're not, Cam. Tell me. Cam never quite understood why his hand lunged out. He never quite knew why he struck Revik brutally across the left temple with the stone bird. He regretted it the moment he'd done it. But too late. Revik fell back heavily on the rug. Blood trickled from the open wound on his head. He reached up a finger and touched it. The tip came away red. Ah, he murmured. Okay, Cameron. We'll do it the other way, the scanner way. Revok rose to his feet. His eyes were points of black silver. I'm going to suck your brain out. Everything you are will become me. I'll inherit your power. We'll be together, no matter what. Brothers. Daryl, please, Cam begged. Pity, compassion, tenderness, even love for this strange, hate-filled, tormented brother made his voice shake. But it was too late. Revok's eyes were chips of black glass as he concentrated on a scan. A low hum filled the air around his narrow head. Cam felt his mind being sucked out like a raw egg. He fought back, resisting out of a sheer instinct for survival. Beyond that gut resistance was a sense that it was terribly important that the hatred in Revok did not triumph. It was now a simple battle between good and evil. Not that his brother was evil, but there was evil in him that had to be defeated, purified out, purged. And only Cam could do it. So he fought as he'd never battled in his life. Their wills locked horns. The scan tone zoomed to a high whine. Cam was pinned to his chair. The leather seemed to be fusing to his back like a second skin. The forearm of the hand holding the stone paperweight began to bulge. The veins swelled like wet purple ropes. He dropped the rock bird from his melting fingers. Then the right side of Cam's face began to swell. The flesh was pumped up into lumps of rock-hard tumor. There was the smell of burning meat in the air. Smoke rose from Cam's blasted cheek. He howled in anguish. He was only dimly aware of Revok's lean axe face lunging at him. He heard him say, as from a great distance, "Cameron, don't be stupid. You can't fight me. Join me." The silent screaming, "No!" sprang from somewhere very deep in Cam's soul. He could never surrender to Revok's hatred. It was a disembodied force in the room, a stink of pure evil. He resisted it with all his life instinct. He fought back. Cam stood up, pushing against the giant's hand that seemed to be shoving his chest. With all the energy, talent, and will he had left, he brought his two hands together, palms locked, arms rigid and pointed at Revok like a rifle. The scan, generated at the base of Cam's spine, leaped like running fire along his arms and arced into Revok's face. Revok's face cratered. A fissure opened in his cheek, cracking the bone. Underground rivers of blood ran through this wound, darkening the older brother's scowl. He grunted with pain. The scan tone screeched. Revok staggered. He looked surprised, even shocked. No one had ever outscanned him before. This was war to the death. Summoning all his force, Revok reversed the scan flow. Cam felt it hit him like a bursting grenade. His face swelled up like a balloon. The bubbling flesh was green and putrid. An artery popped in his chest, bursting through the cage of his ribs, spurting blood. His body began to rot. His eyes popped like burst grapes spouting jets of blood. Cam was in agony. He tore lumps off his face to escape the heat of burning meat. The chunks of cheek were smoking in his hands. Cam sank to his knees. His palms were held out toward Revok like a beggar's asking for alms. The chunks of ripped flesh from his face burst into flames in his hands, little fires of mourning. But Revok had no mercy. He screwed up all his hatred to suck every last drop of force and goodness from his brother's brain. As the fire consumed Cam's whole body, his melting soul fused with Revik's in a marriage of heaven and hell.